Good morning, everybody. So this has gotten off to a really good start so far. If you attended the plenary yesterday, President Clinton had a fantastic panel in which it effectively leads into this panel. So consider this an extension of yesterday. And if you were at the morning plenary, you probably learned a lot about population. I learned a lot about population control that I had not known before. But the best part of CGIU isn't necessarily what we learn, it's what you do with it. It's the activism that results from the talking, from the networking, from the linking together. And so we're going to start off every panel with an award to somebody who's done a fantastic job with their commitment. And hopefully it'll be an encouragement that when this panel is over and we switch to you and we start having discussions at each of the tables, you're going to start brainstorming on what you think the problems are and what you think you can contribute to them and what you think you can do. So I'm going to ask Maggie Nazer to join me on the stage. So Maggie is from Middlebury College, and what she did is that she noticed that in a 2011 study from Imperial College in London, a majority of Palestinian children have grown up in war zones and suffered years of trauma from repeated shellings and the deaths of family and friends. These youths, many out of school and out of work, lack outlets for meaningful expression, and many resort to activities like stone throwing as a means of rebellion and resistance. In a 2013 report on the rights of the children, the United Nations estimated that roughly 2 children every day are arrested for this offense. However, studies have shown that art therapy and creative expression can be an effective tool in helping children cope constructively with the uncertainty, frustration, and fear that they face on a daily basis. So, how is Maggie addressing this problem? She's committed to establishing an intensive 2-week program in the West Bank this summer that will bring together young Palestinian artists and help them develop effective strategies for using art as a means for social change and peaceful advocacy. Participants in the program will meet daily for discussions on leadership, building social movements, and nonviolent activism. They will also join workshops on theater, poetry, art, and songwriting, and begin to work together to develop constructive ideas for creating the positive social change they care deeply about. Throughout these activities, Maggie hopes to help these young artists see their situation through a different lens and approach conflict from a different perspective. And at the end of the program, participants will bring their art to several cities across the West Bank in an effort to foster conversations about nonviolence and promote peaceful solutions to difficult challenges. Please give a round of applause to Maggie.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our distinguished panel for this session. Amjad Attallah, Henny Bizawi, Rabbi Yehuda Sarna, Linda Mills, and our moderator, Mickey Bergman.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. As some of you probably have noticed, we had a little bit of a change in the lineup. Unfortunately, Imam Khalid Latif plane has been canceled due to technical issues, and he got stuck in New York and couldn't join us this morning. But we were fortunate enough to be able to have Linda take his place, who works with him in the program, and we'll hear from Linda very soon, and we wanted to make sure that we have the perspective. We were lucky enough to have Amjad Attallah actually supposed to be our moderator, and we decided we want to hear more from Amjad than just asking questions. So we put him on a panel, and I stepped in just to help facilitate this conversation. So thank you everybody for the flexibility. one other comment before we go into the substance, since today is Shabbat, which is a Jewish special day, Rabbi Sarna will not be using the microphone. He has promised us that his voice projects, so you will all be able to hear him, but he might have... he might have some springs in him, and he might jump up and speak in standing, so we're all going to be excited about that. All right. We're talking about Middle East and North Africa. We're talking about youth and the activity of youth and the role of youth. It's a region, as you all know, about 65% of the population is under 30. It's outstanding, especially since this morning we're talking about how the number of youth is actually decreasing worldwide, which was surprising statistics for us. But in this region, in our region of focus here, it's a major challenge and opportunity. And more often than not, we hear about the challenges part of it and not the opportunity. And I think all of us here at CGIU, you guys who participated and are making commitments on this, are part of that opportunity. And so this is what we want to focus on today. It is not separated, at least in my mind, between youth and the role of women in those changes. We've seen those changes all around, and we're going to talk about that as well here and in the panel that we have in the afternoon, specifically about women in the negotiation table, so I invite you all to come back to that as well. And with that, I want to actually get started with Cheni Bizawi, who flew over here from Israel. And I want to ask you, Cheni, if you can tell us a little bit, start us off with your involvement with Peacebuilders International, a little bit about the organization, the programs, and a little bit about your journey of why you got involved and how it grew.
So, hi everyone. Peacebuilders International, it's a non-profit organization that's working with conflict area in 4 places in the world, in Cyprus, North Ireland, Israel, and Middle East, and South Africa. We're working with young kids and youth through basketball. We're trying to bring both sides to play together and believe that who can play together can live together. I started with Peacebuilders in 2006. Actually, I didn't know that I was starting with Peacebuilders. My coach came and told me, Cheni, I want you start to coach and send me to volunteer in this Arab city that it's like there are Jewish kids and Arab kids living together. I went there and I started to coach these kids, and this is the way I learn about Peacebuilders. And then I start to go to other activities in Jerusalem. That it's another city. It's the capital city. Probably most of you heard about Jerusalem. And there I really fell in love with this organization. I came just because of basketball. I want to learn how to coach. I want to start with these things. But then I find another word. I learned, like I met Palestinian people and another Jewish people, and it's like a big family. We played basketball, you coming to know each other. And then in 2010, I need to go to the army. I went to the army, finished the army, and came back to work as a project manager in the organization. This is the second year.
Thank you, Cheni. And we're going to, I mean, there's something great you said here about we're all, you know, it's a big, happy family. But we all know that life is more complicated than that. And we're going to go back to the challenges in a little bit because it's important to keep that in mind. It's not only kumbaya and singing and hugs, as we know, and we want to go that. I want to turn to you, Rabbi Yehuda. In a similar way, you're a rabbi, you're here in the United States. What propels you to actually step into interfaith work? Has it been something you grew up with? Is it something that you experienced in midlife? You can tell us a little bit about your journey stepping into it.
Sure. So I grew up in Montreal, Canada. My parents raised went to Jewish school my whole life, and then I went to Israel to study for 2 years in a yeshiva. And then I came back to the United States and did my college degree at Yeshiva University, which again is a Jewish Orthodox university. And then I stayed for rabbinical school. So until age 24, all my family and all my friends were really the same religiously. And I started at New York University as the rabbi in 2002. And it took a few years until I actually started forming friendships with people who were not Jewish like me. So to answer your question directly, no, it was not in any way an outgrowth of my upbringing. Quite the opposite. What the transformative moment for me was in 2005. I'm sure many of you have heard of the Danish cartoons, the cartoons of Mohammed, which caused a stir globally, and I think continue to cause a stir. And at NYU, there was a student club which was planning an event whose purpose, I believe, was really to try to make the case that Islam and freedom of speech were incompatible. And the Muslim students were trying to rally an interfaith coalition to try to stop this event, or at least mitigate its consequences. And as I got to understand the Muslim sensitivities around this issue, as well as the inability for the students who were organizing the event to compromise or to understand why Muslim students would not feel comfortable participating in an event like this while the cartoons were being displayed, or while there was no panelists which they felt really represented them. I felt like it was an important moment to step up, because the freedom of speech has to come with the responsibility to listen. And for me, that was my first experience. I said, I never understood what Muhammad means to students who were in my university. I didn't understand what was so problematic about an image which would prompt violent responses around the world. And that was where my friendship with Imam Khalid Latif, who is snowbound in New York, and who couldn't make it today, where our relationship started. And I realized that he was really the first Muslim friend that I had. That summer there was a war between Israel and Hezbollah. And as the war started, I called him. And I said, Khalid, I hope what's going on in the Middle East doesn't affect the friendship that we've begun to form. And after that conversation, I hung up the phone. And I realized this is the first time I've ever been able to call someone, so to speak, on the other side, even though, he's not Palestinian, but nevertheless, or he's not Lebanese. But it's the first time I felt like I was able to call someone on the other side. And I almost felt like, well, every Jew should have someone who is Muslim, or who is Palestinian or Lebanese in that case, who they feel like they could call at a time like this. And so I just felt like as our world, politically, economically, becomes increasingly interdependent, from a religious standpoint, our world needs to become increasingly interfaithful, where the success, the vibrancy, the integrity of one religion is dependent on those same characteristics of others. Abraham Joshua Heschel famously said, "No religion is an island," and that's what impels me to move forward.
Thank you so much, and I want to actually move to Linda over here, because you guys work together, CGIU, and one of the things that we're already seeing here, and we heard a little bit on the panel last night, I think it was America Ferrera who made the point that nothing that happens in one place of the world doesn't affect us directly or indirectly. And if we think that we can silo it, we're wrong. And we're seeing here already a little bit of the conversation between what's happening in the region and how it affects our community in the United States, for those of us who are here. And Linda, you kind of are on the line. You spend time in Abu Dhabi, you spend time in New York, and you're involved in the project at NYU. And I was hoping you can tell us a little bit about, from your experiences on both sides, where do you see, or how do you see young people getting involved, taking action, and if you can tell us a little bit about the project that you're working on as well.
So let me start talking about my own motivation and then why this project became so important to me and what we're trying to do. Speaking of the worlds coming together or colliding, I was on the elementary school playground on the morning of 9/11 with my 5-year-old son in his 3rd day of kindergarten. And at the end of the day, he turned to me and he said, "Mommy, why do they want to kill me?" I was reminded of my mother's story. She was a Holocaust survivor, and the story that she told me, namely that we should hate all Germans, and that's how I grew up my whole life, and that she didn't believe in the power of redemption or the power of a larger story, and that I was clear when my son asked me that question that I wasn't going to be repeating my mother's history and that which she taught me. So the question was, what could I do differently, and what was involved in doing that differently? And that's what takes me to Khalid and Yehuda. I was actually the senior vice provost at the time that the event on campus that Yehuda's just described, where they wanted to show the Danish cartoons, I was involved in trying to negotiate a more peaceful response to that in terms of the students who wanted to show those cartoons on the campus. And I was so deeply moved first by Khalid's clarity about what he needed for his community, and then Yehuda's strength and clarity about his joining Khalid and the significance of their coming together to address this issue in a peaceful and cross-faith way. So all that is to say that then that brings Abu Dhabi into my life, and NYU starts a campus there, and I start going to Abu Dhabi. I've been there about 50 times now over 9 years, and it became clear to me that there were no boundaries, that the world is one, and that we had to figure out how to do that oneness in a very different kind of way. Not because it's easy, not because it's straightforward, but because it's necessary. So I think probably the most inspiring dimension of the work that I think is probably what inspires all of you to be here today is this idea or this notion that despite our differences, there's an urgency for us to figure out how to do this work differently and to come together despite the fact that we are going to feel conflict. So when we came back from this summer, all that had happened, including Ferguson, but also all that had happened between Israel and Palestine, it was so obvious that we needed to bring the community together in a way that would allow everybody to tell their stories and not necessarily in conflict. So we organized a vigil so that everybody could tell their stories, and those stories could be lined up next to each other rather than in conflict and in hatred.
Thank you so much, Linda. You can react. And I think we're going to get to step in even deeper into the movie and the project in a little bit. One of the things that I'm actually really excited. This guy Amjad is beyond the fact that he's now with Al Jazeera English and doing tremendous work with them. Just to get to the diversity, we know each other for about 10 years now. We've been working together. We actually met, I think, for the first time at the Clinton Global Initiative, the inaugural meeting in 2005. And we worked a little bit on Israeli-Palestinian issues, as we hear is always the conversations gravitate towards that when we talk about Middle East, North Africa, even though one of the biggest stories that we've seen in the last several years is not about that. And for the diversity, we found ourselves beyond it, working on Israel-Palestine, we found ourselves on a private jet on the way to Sudan in 2007 to try and negotiate there with Governor Richardson back in the days, a unilateral ceasefire on Darfur, just to give you a little bit of the diversity of this guy. Amjad, before all of that, you actually co-founded Women for Women International. And I want to bring that in as a part of your personal journey into this. Women for Women International, Amjad co-founded with Zainab Salbi, who's been talking at CGI and CGIU several times in the past. But I want to ask you about your journey, why you founded it, how you've seen it, and how it relates to what we've seen, not Israel-Palestine, but actually all the movement, everything that we've seen in the Arab world, in the Middle East, and in North Africa.
Well, thank you, Mickey. So I was actually in a master's program at the University of Virginia when the ethnic cleansing campaign in Bosnia started in the early 1990s. And I was actually studying comparative religious studies. I was doing Islam and Judaism. And you have to do, you concentrate on two major faiths and one minor faith. And so the minor I took was human rights as an ethical construct. So while I was doing that, I was studying obviously about the Holocaust. I was studying Holocaust literature. And one of the things that was most fascinating to me was that really World War II, we remember World War II as a fight to stop the Holocaust. But as many Jews know, that wasn't the case. It was a fight to stop German imperialism. It was a fight to stop fascism. But there was a low-level priority on actually stopping the murder of Jews that was taking place, and others who were being murdered in the concentration camps and in the death camps. And a lot of world leaders knew about it, but not a lot of people knew about it at the time. And there was a lot of studies on why this was the case and why wasn't there more moral outrage about that part of it while it was happening as opposed to after the fact. While I'm studying this and while I'm reading this in the classrooms, I'm picking up the Washington Post, I'm watching the newspapers, and I'm reading about rape camps and concentration camps in a country called Bosnia, which I had not heard of before, and I did not know was in the middle of Europe, and that a lot of the people in the camps were Muslim, a lot of them were Catholic, and it was being perpetrated by the Yugoslav army, which was primarily Orthodox Christian. So I had no framework. I had no framework to place this or to understand it, except for the fact that here I am studying what happened in World War II. And I asked myself, did I want to be one of those people who knew about it and didn't do something about it? 10 years after it ended, do I want to be one of those people who pretended that there was nothing they could do about it, there was nothing? And so Zainab and I traveled to the front line. We traveled to Croatia, and the front line was, the Yugoslav army had established a front line through Croatia and Bosnia. And we traveled with some humanitarian aid workers to refugee camps where we met with women, because most of the refugees were women, and asked them what they needed. And that was the impetus for creating Women for Women. Now, an interesting story connected to the Middle East with this is that there were many, many students from Arab countries who were studying in the former Yugoslavia at the time at universities with scholarships, because Yugoslavia was a socialist country, and countries like Libya and Sudan and Syria were sending students to study medicine and to study dentistry and to study things like that in Yugoslavia. And I met a lot of them who were now involved in humanitarian aid work or working as doctors or helping in the refugee camps. So I remember a conversation I had with a Syrian student, and he said to me, you know, my parents want me to come home, they're terrified. Everybody, you know, the country, the government suspended our stipends because they were paying for us to go to school, and now they're demanding that we come back home because there's a war going on and the universities are shut down. And he said, these Bosnians are fighting for freedom and equality. They're fighting to create a multi-ethnic democratic citizen state. They're fighting to create the kind of country I wish Syria was. So I can go back to Syria and continue dentistry, or I can stay here and fight for a cause much bigger than myself, a cause I wish was my own, and that I'm going to make my own. And after that, I started asking a lot of the Arabs who were there. I mean, in the media, not the Jazeera media, but in the other media, you might often read that everybody's a jihadist and everybody who's involved in these conflicts is a Salafist jihadist. In fact, a lot of people are people just like you who are human rights oriented and who are desperate to make a difference and desperate to make something better. And a lot of them decided to stay in Bosnia and fight this noble fight. That was in the beginning of the 1990s. In the beginning of the 2000s, we saw the beginning of the fight in the Middle East, in the Arab countries, for that same battle. We started seeing activists, men and women, and I shouldn't say men and women, I should say women and men, because women were involved in every aspect. You saw Tawakkul yesterday speaking on stage very eloquently about her role in Yemen. Women have been engaged in Egypt to stop rape and to stop the attacks on women that were being perpetrated by forces associated with the government. You've seen women involved, you've seen Malala and in Pakistan, and you probably didn't know that there were women in Pakistan fighting for the right to education and for a number of other rights that we all take for granted. This has been happening for a very long time, but it's actually started peaking. Now, this year, we're in a negative counter-revolution year where things look bleaker than they did when all of this started. Tunisia is a bright spot, but everything else looks pretty bleak right now. So where are all these people? Well, actually, they're still there. And actually, they're still trying in every way possible, through their own commitments, through their own activism, they're attempting to make a difference. A number of them couldn't be here or can't be here because it's almost impossible for them to travel, or many of them have been arrested in many of the countries that they're working in. And I think part of the debate we have to have is not how do we engage them on peace building, because they're already engaged in desperately trying to create free societies and having, there are bloggers in Saudi Arabia who've been arrested for things that they've tweeted or things that they've written. There are people in a number of countries who've been fighting for freedom of speech within their societies. The largest battle taking place in the Middle East right now is Muslims fighting against ISIS in order to stop ISIS. So you have Kurds who aren't Arabs fighting alongside Iraqi Arabs and 6 other Arab countries desperately trying to stop them. So when people say to me, why aren't Muslims speaking out more against the violence of ISIS, I say, well, in fact, they're engaged in a life and death struggle against ISIS, and they're fighting with their lives against it. The question is, how do we engage with them at a mass scale? How do we engage with them in the same way that we've engaged with Malala, in the same way that we've engaged with Tawakkul, in order to create a maximum effect?
Thank you, Amjad, and I think you're bringing it, you brought it into a good point. I mean, all of you guys are activists. You have commitments, you have ideas, there's a reason why you're here. And what Amjad said, I think is very important. When the intention of people can be all positive, in a lot of mass, in big numbers, yet implementation is challenging. Getting the voices out, making the connections is difficult. And I want to make sure that we focus on that a little bit, and not for the obvious reasons. The reason why 2 people in conflict can't get together and do something is not because they're in conflict. There's a whole other slew of reasons and complexities that come into it. And for that, I'm going to get back and forth a little bit. I'm going to ask Henny, and I'm going to ask then Linda and Rabbi Yehuda on this. With your perspective projects, tell us a little bit about the less expected challenges of actually getting on the ground and doing work. A little anecdote, I work in areas that are problematic. I work in North Korea, I work in Cuba, personally in my professional life, and I find that the intention, very similar to what we're in the Middle East, the intention is there, but the challenges are surprising at times, and you don't always recognize what they are. And Henny, with your work, in the middle of your work, you enlisted in the military, in the Israeli military, which is very controversial regionally. You had a war between the 2 populations that you're. Can you tell us a little bit about those challenges, how you dealt with them, not necessarily overcame them, how you dealt with them, and then we'll go to Yehuda and Linda.
So first, it's very important to say I probably sound like this is very big, nice family, but going back to my journey, like for me to go to coach or even go to places that have a lot of Arabs, it was scary. My mom would like, why you should go there? Like, I don't know, my coach sent me, so I'm going there. It's not anything about, like, it's for my Palestinian people that in the organization, for these girls to play basketball, it's a huge step. It's something that they never even, like, think about it. So first, before, like, the war, before the army, have, like, each side living in, like, I know that I left in a bubble. Like, all my friends, when people hear that I'm working in peace organization, the response is most of the time that's like, why are you doing that? You know it's never will be peace. And a lot, and a lot of the things, like, on the ground, when you join, like, when you take part of this organization, it's the people around. It's really, so, but if I'm taking this challenge and I'm saying, like, how I'm dealing with that, so first, this is a long process. This is something that takes time. I can tell you that when I be more and more in peace players, my family, I also see, like, I have a friend, her name is Aisha, and my mom met her, and my brother met her, and for them, like, now it's another Palestinian that you can talk with and not hate. And for me, to know each other more, and I can really go back and talk with people and tell people, like, look, like, it's work between us. It's work between me and Aisha. It's work between this group of girls that play in basketball. But it's really hard. It's hard, and it's taking a lot time, and it's long process even to myself to even think about, well, I can go to her house. I don't know. Maybe she will kill me. I don't know. So it's take time, and then I went to the army, and this is also for both sides. It's something, army, it sounds very, it's not a good thing. Like, it sounds like you're going to the army and you're gonna fight for them, you're gonna fight, like, for the Palestinian, you're gonna fight them. For Israeli, you save yourself, like, you protect yourself. But I don't think someone can look the army as a good thing, but I think we learn with the time that if you're coming with different perspective to the army, and if you're coming to the army when you see the Arabs as a people, and they see you in the same way. So when I'm in the checkpoint, for example, I'm not gonna, I will be nice. And I see, like, this guy have family, have kids, he wanna go to work, he wanna get food, get money, and go back. When I look in the things different, it's make my life easier, and it's make their life easier. And I believe that, like, that's what I see, when people live better, so they can really make a better life. And when you have a better life, and doing the war, it was hard, very hard time. We're working with kids. Parents don't want to send their kids to the practice because in some point maybe they will meet Arabs, and we don't know what's gonna happen. And but we trying to stay. We have a leadership program, and the older kids, we play together for, like, almost 10 years, and we have a strong relationship. We start trying to stay together, and it's remind me what you said, that you called to your friend during the war and ask him if everything is the same. So we had 2 wars together, actually, and each time that they heard that have a bomb on Tel Aviv, they call me and ask me if me and my family safe, and if I heard something happened in their places, I'm trying also to to call them. It's really hard. It's really hard. And
So you said something, I think you pointed out to something very important, and it's kind of we might not recognize it, but this is kind of the thesis of it all. At the end of the day, it's human interaction. And if we're able to establish that connection, that engagement in a personal level, and substantial and meaningful, it can withhold challenges. And it leaves us a challenge that we're going to go in a couple of minutes, we're going to go and give you an opportunity to ask questions of the panelists. But I wanted Yehuda and Linda, if you can comment very quickly, because we're all watching the clock here as well, some of us, on the project, the film that you've been involved in, what's the thesis of change, or the theory of change on that, and how it impacts actually the students, what you've seen, what are the challenges on this?
So in 25 seconds, the film is about Khalid and Yehuda's relationship, and exactly that point, namely that when people come together at the personal level, that the transformational change that's possible is truly remarkable. And that once you know each other, there's a way in which you work across divides in a different kind of manner. There's just an openness that happens. There's a care and a depth that can happen to really overcome everything, and that seems so aspirational, but that's what seems so obvious. There's one other observation I'd like to make, and that is that the affirmative stories that are so rare, which is what everybody on this panel has already talked about, they're so rarely told. They're very common, and I would guess that each person in this room has actually experienced that kind of commonality and crossing the divide. That when we tell those stories, it inspires a different kind of affirmation. It inspires a different kind of possibility than when we tell all the negative stories. So there's and this is what the film tries to do, which is how do we rise above that conflict to find each other in a different mindset so that we can, in fact, act differently towards each other and have the potential for peace.
I'll just add that my experience has been that in this work, what it takes 1,000 people to build, it really only takes one person to destroy. And this is about building trust. Conflict leads to fear, and fear leads to myopia, where you all of a sudden your line of vision becomes constricted to the people who are closest to you. And I saw that this past summer when I was in Israel with my family. I saw it happening to myself, you know, and which is a scary thing, and which I felt was a scary thing for me. But that can't be a reason to disengage, because we need to believe that ultimately we can scale what we're doing into the thousands, and we can create a narrative that's so dominant that it will buffer against the destructive acts of fear.
Thank you. And I think what President Clinton last night said, just because you can't do everything doesn't give you the right not to do what you can. And I thought it resonated with me when he said it. I want to open it up for questions from you. We still have them for a while, so don't worry, it's not over yet. Questions we have. Oh, wow. All right, let's start from this and we'll roll down. And please say your name very quickly and make sure that the question remains quick so we can actually hear from them all.
Hi, my name's Ashley Lohman, and I work on U.S. Middle East cross-cultural understanding. And the question I have draws from this discussion that just happened, which is how do we get more of the stories out there about social activism and social entrepreneurship, because it's really prevalent in the region, but a lot of what we see is conflict and violence.
Fantastic question, and I'm going to let Amjad start with it, considering that he is in a very significant...
So, well, actually, governments will say that it's all our fault for reporting on the demonstrations that people are engaged in the first place. But you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, the news is primarily about what's not working, and the news is not primarily about the efforts of what is working. We've tried, as a network, we've tried very hard to actually concentrate. We even had a series, documentary series, specifically on the demonstrations that were taking place everywhere from in the United States with the Occupy movement to Europe and the Middle East, because I think one thing that people don't realize is that all of these movements are actually connected. And, you know, sometimes when they're so large, when you have mass movements taking place, it's hard to focus on individuals, and sometimes focusing on individuals makes them targets. But so it's a balance on trying on how one does that. But the reality is that when there were demonstrations in Wisconsin to take over the state courthouse in order to prevent some legislation from being passed, demonstrations in Egypt, demonstrators were having their demonstrations in Egypt against Hosni Mubarak. They were ordering on the internet pizza to send to the people in Wisconsin and saying, from your compatriots and your comrades in Cairo. And the connection between Latin American demonstrations and Latin American movements for democracy and movements for freedom and movements for freedom of speech and in the Middle East, there have been a lot of cross connections. I think, but you're right, we end up focusing on when they fail. We end up focusing on when individual efforts fail. And the truth of the matter is that the movements haven't failed. The effort is ongoing. I mean, it's hard to remember this, but in the 1980s, virtually almost every country in Latin America was a military junta or a dictatorship. And today, Latin America is a thriving area with lots of different kinds of governments and in various levels of development. 1980 seems like a long time ago, but it wasn't a really long time ago. The Middle East is starting that process now. I mean, you're really seeing an effort at the beginning of global change, but it's not global change in isolation of what's happening everywhere else. And so maybe the answer to your question is for us to be able to, there are some that resonate, stories, individual stories that become iconic for other things. Malala becomes iconic. Tawakkul becomes iconic. And the real question is how to identify all of the other people that are actually involved with them. Because they're actually, desperate to tell you that they're not speaking for themselves. There's a whole bunch of other people doing what they're doing.
And just to add tiny thought on that, I think that the media also has been changing tremendously in the way we consume it on social platforms. And that actually it takes the blame from the networks and say, wait a minute, we actually are responsible for that because we can push out positive stories as well because we're the media when it comes to the social networks as well. We're going to do 2 questions at a time so we can fit a little bit more. Let's start on this side. Oh, sorry.
Would it be possible, could we just get all the questions out and then respond?
I don't think we have time. Okay, let's do 3 of them. Let's go. Just yeah. So we can
Hi, my name is Matt Nguyen, and my project deals primarily with education, but I do think that in terms of at least how people perceive contexts, especially in conflict regions, there's this pervasive notion of indivisibility. Indivisibility in institutions of power, indivisibility in religious centers, indivisibility in social constructs and the way that society interacts with each other. And I think some examples of it include sort of inability to attain positions in power for like Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, for Egyptians, even within intra-religious conflicts, dealing with whether or not their society should be secular or not, or how pervasive it should be within the region. And in addition, we obviously see this in the Israeli-Palestinian region as well, where there's geographic ideas of indivisibility, but also indivisibility when it relates to spaces, including Jerusalem and the sharing of religious institutions that both religions feel are intrinsically, important to them. And so my question is, as much as I believe, and I think we all believe, that individual stories, individual narratives are so amazingly powerful, it seems like institutional constructs are constantly baffling us, constantly, causing inertia and the retaining of the status quo. And so how do we overcome that? Is it truly that sharing more stories, moving forward with these social movements, as Tawakkul said, is that going to be the solution? Or do we need to enter institutional frameworks, change institutions from the inside, and produce sort of this coalition, whether it's through political actors, religious actors, and societal factors as well?
It's a great question. Let's move and take a few more. Roll in a little bit. Can you reach? Oh, you have. start moving over there. We'll do one by one. Okay, do this and then.
Hi, my name is Ariel. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us. My question has to do with experiences that I've had personally with interfaith work and trying to create organizations that work towards more meaningful engagement between people of different faiths. And a problem I've run into is that the people who join these organizations who are interested in doing that work, those people are already interested and they're tolerant and they enjoy that type of engagement. But often it's more difficult to engage the people who will never come to those meetings or who feel pressure either from their families or communities to not engage in interfaith work. How do we grab those people, and is there a way to specifically get them engaged and overcome those barriers that they're facing, or potentially to provide them with education to let them overcome maybe preconceptions they have about people of other faiths?
Thank you, Ariel.
Thanks.
We'll take one last question here. And by the way, when we break to table discussions, they're still here. We can still ask them questions. So.
My name is Neethu, and I'm a UC Berkeley alumnus. While at Berkeley, I was involved with an organization called Olive Tree Initiative, which is conflict resolution and education about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I was part of many interfaith groups despite not being Jewish or Muslim. I visited Israel, the West Bank, Jordan, and refugee camps, and spoke to Knesset members and activists alike. When I came back to UC Berkeley, I realized that a lot of people kind of conflate the issue of Judaism with supporting Israel. And currently in Berkeley and larger universities, there's a huge movement to recognize anti-Semitism on the same level as Islamophobia and discuss how anti-Semitism needs more visibility. This question is for the people at NYU, and I really want to know what steps are being taken in NYU to prevent anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and how do you make unaffiliated people care about other communities? Specifically, how is NYU Hillel and other Jewish groups working to educate the larger student body about what anti-Semitism means in the modern world? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're going to do a lightning round of answers here very quickly, and then we'll go back to the to table discussions and continue. Who wants to start? We had NYU was the last question. Let's start with that and roll down.
Okay, so response to the question over here, I would say side by side more than face to face, meaning pull religious groups together to address common problems, a problem that many people will recognize, because that will broaden the people that you can attract.
Ferguson, for example.
And on the other question from over here, I just wanted to say that it's a delicate subject. If something is outright anti-Semitism, and we work closely with national organizations that kind of define what is and what isn't, we would stop. We would make a very, very big deal about it. The stickiest thing is what is and what isn't. What is political commentary? What is the free expression of political views by one group? And at what point does it infringe on another? I do feel that faculty bear a lot of responsibility in guiding activist groups and in making sure that they check, that students who are activists check their language and understand at what point they might be crossing a certain boundary. So at UCLA, for example, where a student who was affiliated with Hillel was not allowed on a judiciary board because of that affiliation, that's deeply problematic. Obviously, I would hold the students who made that decision accountable, but I want to know who is the faculty, who is the administrator, who is advising these students, and what kind of education are they giving them.
Ultimately, she was invited to the board.
Ultimately, she was invited to the board, but would that have happened?
The end of that
Yes,
story.
yes, okay, happy ending. But for me, it would only be a happy ending if you identify the administrators, the faculty, and we say, we need to have a conversation with you, because I need to know how you are explaining to students that there's a difference between advocating for Palestinian rights and disallowing Jewish students from participating on boards.
I wanna have had something to the first question about the media, and then it's I hope
long as
it's
we're
will
quick.
answer. So I think from my work in the ground, I see a lot of people that they can't even be involved in this organization, like that it's peace organization. So for your question, I think we like make people coming by find like subject or something that it's neutral, it's something it's not about like, it's have like the basketball, have another with soccer, it can be a lot other things. And this is the way you touch a lot of people that they not ever thought they're gonna be able to talk to the other side or talk about peace. But if with the time and in the long process, you bring them in. So a lot of my friends, for example, can't be in the, if we're doing, I don't know, something in the social media or something like that, they coming from places sometimes that they're very dangerous for them to be involved. I know we had like one coach that in this this village, we taking the girls out of the village to have practice. And if someone will know about this coach, that he support Peacebuilders, for example, and he support to these girls meeting with Jewish, he can be like in trouble. And I think the best way to spread it and the best way to, it's to be involved and make more people to be involved and to take part. And then, for example, if in all of your Facebook will have like a one story or two story that you saw, that you see, that you was there between one Israeli and one Palestinian, and for example, I have like 5 Palestinian friends and they have 10 Jewish friends, and this is the way that I believe we can spread it more. And because other ways, it will be, it sometimes can do the opposite, I don't say, but the opposite thing, and it can not do good, do just like.
I think your question, I'll just respond to your question. I think that's you made really, really good points, and they require, I think, a much longer conversation. I'll just say as a snippet, look, revolutions and change are almost always created and led by people like you, and they're created by your demographic. And they're almost always hijacked and pushed back against by people in my demographic now, because they're part of the institutions, and the institutions are clawing to keep the power structures that they already have. And the two in the Middle East that are the most powerful, of course, are security and money. And those push back against the idealism and the zeal and the creativity of the people who are actually making the change. And I think it's an absolute right question to ask, how is it that we're going to actually help give legs to that creativity and give armor to those changes so that they can survive there will always be pushback. There will always be attempts to hijack the revolution. There will always be attempts to hijack the change. And I think that that's one of the things that will define how quickly we succeed in the Middle East going forward.
All right, so thank you for that. Here's what's going to happen now. We're going to actually take about 10 minutes into to discuss, for you to get to know each other around the tables. And here's what I want to challenge you. I know we heard some of the anecdotal stories and successes. We know you have them because you've made commitments or you're involved, whether it's specifically on this topic or in others. And one of the challenges that we have is how do we actually scale it? And a point that we had on the panel here is the fact that all of this is so important to have the direct engagement and a meaningful relationship with somebody else. How do you scale something like that? It can't be on an online platform only. It has to be a person. What are the things that you can do and we can do either on campus as individuals and the projects that we're running, the successful projects that you're running and that you're planning, to actually give it a little bit more scale? I want you to think about that as you're introducing yourselves around the tables. Tell your colleagues about what you do. And we're going to come back, convene back in about 10 minutes, back to the panel, and we're going to hear from some of you as well. I actually love that sound. I love the sound that everybody's talking, because that means that things are happening, that we're talking in the tables, and that's exactly why we're here. We do want to hear just from a couple of you, and then allow the panelists to respond to that and to have some concluding thoughts. And I think we're starting with this table, right?
Hello. So we didn't really get too much into it, but we basically started talking about doing, like, one idea we had was interfaith, like, community service events type of events, and like finding common goals that we can kind of get together and have, you know, form relationships over. But we also talked about how the importance of not just having dialogue, but then turning that dialogue into actual action. And making real change. And then we also touched on things happening on our campuses and how sometimes things can get focused on like one particular issue or one particular country, whether it's Israel, Palestine, or somewhere else, and where sometimes we have to bring this to our campuses because our campuses are not talking about it. And then sort of the challenges, both administratively but also just socially, about being social activists and trying to do like interfaith work and things like that.
Thank you. And we're going over there, yeah.
So we started the conversation in terms of how do we approach, especially, you know, if you're growing up in Israel, or if you're growing up in the Middle East, how do we begin to approach these topics? You know, if you have two adults in the room who have grown up thinking certain ways, we could try to engage them in a conversation. So what got to was, put two 8-year-olds in a room, and they're not going to fight with each other unless it's over sharing crayons, you know? Like, kids don't grow up with this idea of hate. It's often something that is taught. So really, on a more grassroots level, to work on having children engage with each other. In Israel, there are only 5 schools that are non-segregated. So really just to get to the root of level so that when they're adults, their conversations will be as friends as opposed to a conversation that has a lot of stereotypes that are really known on the other side.
Thank you. I want to make sure that we get a chance to hear a little bit from our panelists and respond to some of that and some of the conversations each of our panelists actually sat in one of the tables, and some concluding thoughts as well, because we're reaching the end, and I think we'll start going this way this time. So let's go, Andrew.
Well, in response to what you were saying, I think good causes attract good people. And the place where I've interacted on a very concrete, hands-on basis with Mickey, with others, has been when we've been working together on a common cause. And so everybody, when I was working on Bosnia, the largest communities in the United States that were caring about it and working on it were actually the American Jewish community and the American Muslim community. And, you know, it was sometimes comical to watch us attempt to coordinate and cooperate with each other, but in fact, those relationships then lasted, you know, forever afterwards. In South Africa, the anti-apartheid movement. Everybody was involved in the anti-apartheid movement, even in South Africa. The Muslims, the Jews, Jewish communities, Muslim communities, communists, you know, a wide variety of traditions and faiths were actually all working together for a common cause. And that spread outside of South Africa to everybody who was involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. So I think one of the best places to find the most useful interfaith cooperation is when you identify a cause, a common cause that everybody cares about and is concerned. And you'll find that you establish working relationships as opposed to, you know, simply superficial relationships. You establish working relationships that then lead to meaningful change.
I want to start to say that I really agree what she's saying about like when you work with kids, and I can tell you it's before 8. Even at 8 they have already stereotype, so it's a little bit before even. But I believe this is the only way. We talk here in this table, but have no shortcut. Like you can't just do something and this conflict will disappear, or have it's a long process. Probably in Israel and Palestine conflict, another 2 years, it's not gonna gone. Or, but what the place I'm taking my motivation to work and to do the things I'm doing, I've been changed. I came from family that the opinions there, it's very strong and very it's really hard to hear that, but my brother used to say, like, not just he hates all the Palestinians, he thinks that we need to send them to the sea or things like that. And after I changed my perspective, and after a lot Shabbat dinner that we fight on that, and I'm trying to show him how the other side living. In the last war, we're sitting next to the TV, watching news, and we see pictures from Gaza. And what he said, it's like, wow, the kids in Gaza, they're so poor. And I was, wow, you see them as a people, as a human, and you have empathy to the other side. And now he never will say, I think we need to kill someone, or he will say, yeah, I believe in peace, but he will say, oh, you know what, maybe what you're doing can help. So it's maybe a very small step, but as Amjad said, in every change in the world, like a revolution, everything starts with one step, with small change, and a lot small change become a big one. And if I change myself, if I become, and I believe in peace, and I believe that we can do something to make our life better and our world better, I think everyone can, and I think everyone should. It's small, we can't see the result now, but our kids will live in a better place. That's it, thank you.
So my word of advice would be ingenious. So if concerned about a message not spreading, figure out a compelling visual which would actually carry, which people would want to share on their Facebook feed. Many of you may have seen in Norway there was a Muslim ring of peace around a synagogue. That's a compelling visual which then spreads. So don't just sit back. Be ingenious. Think outside the box in terms of what will be. Don't just fill a role. I know as a rabbi in Interfaith, I know sometimes I'm called on because an organization or a platform will just want a rabbi standing next to an imam, standing next to a priest, standing next to, but that's just playing a role that's not actually being a change maker. So be ingenious. Figure out what's a way to work the system which can turn things in a direction that people would not expect.
Okay, inspired by those words, having brought the film to many, many audiences, the film's called Of Many for those who are interested, having brought it to many audiences just a couple of days ago, an audience member said to me, what if Khalid and Yehuda were sitting at the peace table in the Middle East? And all of a sudden I realized, to your institutional point, that perhaps we had the wrong people sitting at the table. And so my challenge to all of you is, what if we spent the next week figuring out a different kind of peace plan, people who had come together and appreciated difference, people who understood the value of every human life and understood the complexity of trying to work through that conflict, but did it in a way that respected each other, appreciated each other, and even loved each other. What a different world it would be, and what a different peace process it might be. So on that note, I would leave you with the challenge to try and think about what it would be like to have 100 of you sitting around this table and trying to think about peace in the Middle East.
Thank you so much, Linda. So what's going to happen now is that you're actually going to go and have lunch, and there's a program. But we are coming back here for the afternoon session, and here's what we're going to do. And it's interesting, Linda, you just asked, what if we have the wrong table, the people sitting around the table? In this afternoon, we're going to approach it and saying, ask me this way. Do you know how many women have been in the negotiations between the Israelis and Palestinians? Actually sitting negotiators? I believe it was one? One. Okay. I ask again, what if we have the wrong people around the table? So our afternoon session is going to focus by talking about the world, not only the Middle East, but really zoom in on the role of women as peace builders in the communities. And I really hope you will engage and come back to that. Mark Hannes, who stands over there, raise your hand for a second, and myself, we coordinate the Peace and Human Rights. We would love to get your thoughts. We're here today, we're here tomorrow for the Action Day as well. Please come to us, talk to us. We love to engage. I think our panelists are still going to stay with us. And just before we leave, please help me in thanking our panelists again for coming. And